Welcome back. You're watching To The Point. There's no doubt that Arun Jaitley's budget has been well received by most quarters. But it's also true that critical questions have been raised by opposition politicians, as well as, to be honest, politicians from within the BJP themselves. With me today to answer those concerns, because they do need to be answered, is the Minister for Power and Coal, Piyush Goyal. Mr. Goyal, let me first put to you some of the comments and concerns about the budget made by economists and by the financial dailies. I'll then come to the concerns expressed by politicians after that. It's said that in some regards, this budget is in fact a post-dated check. Things like reduction in corporate taxation, rationalization of subsidies, even ease of doing business are promises that could take several years to be delivered. And in some cases, to be honest, there isn't even a deadline. How do you respond to that characterization that this is in many respects a post-dated check?
Well, I think governments work over a long tenure of time. There are so many initiatives that this budget has already taken forward, whether it is the strength of cooperative federalism, whether it's the universal social security network that sought to be created where every one of India's citizens will have social security, will have pension plans, will have life insurance and accident insurance. For the first time, a pensionless and insecure architecture has been converted to a forward-looking, universal, socially secure architecture. A lot of action on the front of kickstarting the economy. The Mudra Bank will help small and micro enterprises get funds, which over so many years,
I accept all that.
50 million small traders, small people who otherwise have no access to funds and employ nearly 120 million people will finally have an access to capital.
Minister,
so many new things have come in this budget. At the same time, just like Prime Minister Modi has a vision for India in the long term, like he desires 2022 to be a landmark
I accept
year,
all of that.
a policy-setting agenda has been set forth.
I accept the points you're making. They're very valid points. But I want to come back to the areas where both the financial dailies and economists believe this is a post-dated check and take you through each of them one by one. To begin with, Mr. Jaitley has said that he would have liked to start the reduction in corporate taxation immediately, but he didn't because, as he put it, he didn't want to take industry by surprise. Now, I put it to you, this is the sort of surprise industry would welcome. So is that really a credible explanation, or was Mr. Jaitley deterred by the Delhi election results? And did he decide he didn't want to put out a pro-rich image just when you've lost the popular vote in the capital?
Karan, if at all one small state election result were to deter either the Prime Minister or the Finance Minister, then you wouldn't have seen so many very, very significant forward-looking steps. In this particular case, you are missing one very important point. When the corporate tax rate was to be reduced, simultaneously the exemptions go. He has explained it in great detail that currently we have a 30% tax rate.
Why not start this year?
But the effective collection is only 23%.
But start this year and do both.
Some exemptions would have...
Do both on a staggered basis starting this year. Why start next year?
Because, Karan, we are on record and we have made a promise to the world that we will not do anything which will disturb or which will have retrospective effect on taxation. Now, there are a series of tax exemptions which corporates enjoy. It would have been very unfair. For example, in the power sector, new power plants have exemption up till 2017, as announced in July of 2014. The purpose of that was to have stability of policy for 3 years. Now, if we were to start taking back these exemptions, I think we would be doing the same mistake that the other erstwhile government had done. It is not the intention of Prime Minister Modi's government to give the world a surprise of that sort. As each exemption reaches its sunset clause and gets phased out, we'll be able to share the benefit as a lower tax rate.
Let me give you then a second example. Let me give you a second example. Last year, when Mr. Jaitley presented the budget in July, he appointed the Bimal Jalan committee to advise the government on how to cut subsidies. in separate interviews afterwards, including in one to me, he assured the country that we would see subsidy cuts in February. Now, Bimal Jalan presented his interim report several weeks ago. But when it comes to reducing subsidies, you've only reduced the oil subsidy, and that's entirely because the oil prices come down. Actually, beyond that, fertilizer and food subsidies have gone up by almost 10,000 crore compared to last year. So many people ask, why has Mr. Jaitley failed to deliver on his promise to cut subsidies? And once again, did the Delhi election frighten him and make him lose somehow his commitment?
Karan, much as you may like, I don't think the Delhi election has any role to play in forming the national budget. The fact is that we have to take into consideration the entire gamut of the state of affairs of the Indian people. Finance Minister never talked in terms of harming the interests of the poor people. What we are attempting to do, and he has made that appeal on the floor of the House, for example, when it comes to gas subsidy, that the people cooperate, people like you and me should give up our subsidies. Incidentally, I've given up my gas subsidy.
That's voluntary, not a cut in subsidies.
So
that's different, isn't it? That's a voluntary request, not a cut in subsidies.
Similarly, the cut in subsidies will come as we gradually move towards direct benefit transfer. The Bimal Jalan committee has also not recommended that we harm the interests of the farmers or the middle class.
Mr. Goyal.
What is recommended is rationalizing the processes so that leakages can be
Mr.
cut.
Goyal,
And we can have more targeted subsidies.
I'm hearing your answer, but what your answer then suggests to me is that when Arun Jaitley in his July budget and in interviews to people like me after the July budget clearly said that we would see subsidy cuts in February, he was either jumping the gun or he hadn't borne in mind that you have to do it much more carefully than he was suggesting at the time. In other words, he was being impetuous in July. Now he's being wise and cautious, which is why he hasn't done it now. That's what you're suggesting.
Not at all. What I'm suggesting is that there is a certain problem that the farmers faced in the last year. This was certainly not an opportune time, considering the deficient and delayed monsoon, to look at any sort of rationalization at this stage.
Okay.
However, you will find that the overall subsidy has been kept quite a bit under control. Further, the earlier subsidy unpaid bills have all been cleared by this government, and we have presented to the people a more honest state of affairs and the reality as it exists, rather than hiding or getting behind the shield of not projecting the exact subsidy.
Let me then come to a third example where people feel the budget is nothing more than a post-dated check. And this is to do with ease of business. The government, according to the budget, will appoint an expert committee to prepare a draft legislation to replace multiple permissions with a regulatory framework. Now, first of all, that process could take anything up to 1 year. Secondly, you came to power knowing that ease of business was a major problem. Surely this is a step you should have taken last year. So I put it to you, A, you've taken this step 9 months too late, and B, the step you've taken could take a whole year to deliver. There's no great speed here.
Well, this kind of a legislation will be a first in India after 67 years. It encompasses nearly 18 other laws which need to be put together into a framework and will certainly have to go through a very careful process. But you have seen the government work soon after the Supreme Court judgment on cancellation of coal blocks, and in less than 4 months we have been able to do what the erstwhile government couldn't do in 10 years. So I suggest you need not be fearsome that it will take 1 year. This government is more decisive, it can act fast, and I'm sure once Finance Minister gets down to business, he'll be able to come out with a new regulation which encompasses all these 16 laws and makes it easy for an entrepreneur to start business. Having said that, he's corrected a number of inverted duties. He has deferred CAR and made it far easier to get into REITs so that people can come and invest in India. He has announced a 20,000 crore rupee per year as a government corpus contribution to seed a fund, which coupled with
all of that
CPSEs
I
and
accept.
international investors.
All of that except I was only
could, over
talking
the next
about this
4
draft
years,
legislation
look at
that you could have thought of earlier.
$500 billion.
Let me come.
Well, there are a lot of movements towards making it easier to do business, which he has brought into this budget. I can list out. I have all the lists before me.
Let's not.
I don't know if you're interested in knowing all these steps.
I take your point. I was talking about the delay in this legislation, which you could have thought of a year earlier, because you knew this problem existed when you came to power. But I take your answer. Delivery will happen quickly.
Let's come,
Mr. Goyal, let's come to some of the comments.
Preparing the first budget.
Okay, let's come to some of the comments made by politicians, because I think those are things that you would want to answer as well. And I'll start with a comment made by Yashwant Sinha, a former BJP finance minister. He says, and I'm quoting him, Mr. Jaitley missed an opportunity. This is far from a big bang budget. And what Mr. Sinha is saying is A, you could have been, and B, you should have been bolder. In contrast to what you could and should have done, Mr. Jaitley has been timid, if not pusillanimous. How do you respond to Yashwant Sinha?
Well, I don't know the rest of the comments that you made attributed to the meaning of what Mr. Yashwant Sinha said. I'm not aware of his mind as well as you are probably. But the fact is that this budget has more big bang, more action than we have seen in many years. For instance, the attack on black money. I think it's a big move forward, 10-year rigorous improvement, 300% penalty, and confiscation of property both in India and abroad. I think it's a big step to address the problem of black money.
Can I suggest a step you didn't take?
Projects.
Can I suggest a step you didn't take? You see, you're very keen on pushing Make in India. You're very keen on hiking up the share of manufacturing in India's GDP. Critical to that is, in fact, labour law reform. Your ally, Naresh Gujral, doesn't miss an opportunity to say that without labour law reform, Make in India simply will not happen. Secondly, Vasundhara Raje Scindia has begun to do it in Rajasthan. And the Prime Minister has actually written to State Chief Ministers asking them to emulate Vasundhara. But Mr. Jaitley didn't say a word about it in the budget. He finds time in the budget to put in sentences about bankruptcy laws, about contract dispute resolution, about ease of doing business. But critical to Make in India is a message on labour law reform, and he's silent. And people wonder why.
Well, Karan, two things. One, everything is not said in every budget. So we have 100 things that are happening on a day-to-day basis. The finance minister doesn't allude to every issue in every budget. Point two, amongst many things that we have done for ease of business, states have the capacity, and it's a concurrent subject, in their respective states, considering their compulsions, their requirements, they are free to improve on that. We as government have improved the system of Provident Fund, of pensions for the unorganized labor. We are trying to make it easier for casual labor to move within jobs and continue to get the benefit both of pension and Provident Fund. By the way, India today does not have the kind of agony on labor law that Europe, for instance, has.
Well, yes, but many Indians want labour law reform as well, and you know that.
ArcelorMittal could not close a plant in Europe. Indian laws are not as intimidating as European laws.
Well, actually, so industrialists will contest that. Industrialists will contest that, which is why Vasundhara Raje has moved to change the Industrial Disputes Act, because she firmly believed that it was a disincentive to new entrepreneurship and new investment. You're saying that this could possibly happen later. People wonder why it didn't happen now, because it would have sent a very powerful message.
Well, it can happen at the state level. Each state is free to do what they like at their state level. It's a concurrent subject. From the center, we are trying to make it easier in terms of operating the various laws, in terms of labor causing industry not to come here. To the best of my knowledge, no businessman. I was at Davos hardly 1 month ago. Not one delegation.
I'll accept that.
Not one interaction from anywhere in the world
let me
Talk to me
raise
about
another
labour reform.
Let me raise another area where people feel for political reasons you've ducked an essential reform that would have sent a very positive message. I'm talking about retrospective taxation. Last year in his July budget, Mr. Jaitley promised that there would be no retrospective taxation, but he retained on the statute books the power to have retrospective taxation. That didn't satisfy many foreign investors, and they were hoping that this year he would revise his mind and actually scrap that law. Once again in the budget, he's promised not to do it again. He reiterated the old promise, but that power remains in the statute book. And people wonder, why is it so politically difficult for Mr. Modi to revise and revoke a silly mistake made by Pranab Mukherjee when he was finance minister, particularly when so many foreign investors tell you this is irritating them and putting them off?
Well, making a law change now would be another retrospective amendment. So we would actually be reneging on our own promise not to make retrospective amendments.
But you'd be doing it in the right direction.
But the bigger point is, no, but yes, so well, the right and wrong is always debatable. Honorable President, then Finance Minister, felt he was doing the right thing. All of us contested it that time. I'm on record in Parliament, and I
Which is why I asked, since you contested it, revoke it. Why leave it in the books?
Yes, yes. But now it's a part of the law. We will have to respect the law as it stands. Going forward, we have already made loud and clear comments and commitment that it will not happen. And I think the world at large believes and trusts Mr. Modi because he delivers on what he says.
All right, let me then come to one other type of
commitment that we are now going to do retrospective amendment of what the UP has already done.
Let me then come to one other type of political comment. This time it is from the opposite end of the spectrum to Yashwant Sinha. It comes from former Finance Minister Chidambaram. And he's made two connected comments. First of all, he says this is a pro-rich budget with a series of tax concessions for corporates and income tax payers, whereas the non-tax-paying majority is hit with higher indirect taxes. And secondly, he says that critical allocations for very important schemes and programs which cater for the poor have been cut this year compared to last year. He talks about the scheduled caste subplan, the tribal subplan, drinking water and sanitation, health and family welfare, the integrated child development services. Is this a pro-rich, anti-poor budget, and might that image, even if it's not the reality, end up causing you serious problems politically?
Well, Karan, a very illustrious former finance minister making comments which are completely false surprises me because I thought he would be able to read the budget better. First of all, there is an increase in corporate tax and there is a higher tax on the super rich. Now, if Mr. Chidambaram is not happy about that, he will have to tell the people whether that is pro-rich or what the finance minister has done. Finance minister has increased the corporate tax and the super rich tax. Point two, even going forward, if at all one was to accept that Mr. Chidambaram is referring to the future, even going forward, the effective tax being paid over the years is only 23%, even though the rate is 30%. What FM Jaitley is trying to do is to bring that down, remove all the exemptions. So people actually pay 25%, which is still 2% more or 10% over 23% more. So what the FM is doing is better and simplified tax laws, a regime which is non-discriminatory, which doesn't allow discretion,
can I then come to a last question?
Allow corruption, and actually increases the tax on the rich. As regards the poor and the middle class, most of the budget schemes have increased for the middle class and the poor. All the social sector schemes have gone up,
Goyal,
despite a larger allocation to the states after the 14th Finance Commission. So I think Mr. Chidambaram needs to see the expenditure holistically and understand that all scheme expenditures have gone up while simultaneously giving states more money, which gives them flexibility based on each state's requirement.
I take your point.
More.
Let me come to one last question, because sadly time is our enemy, and it's to do with, in fact, the Land Acquisition Amendment Ordinance. It's stuck at the moment. We don't know whether it's going to pass the Rajya Sabha. There is in fact already speculation from your allies in particular that you're going to have to make critical dilutions. You're going to have to perhaps permit a certain percentage of social impact assessment, a certain percentage of the consent clause. And I put it to you, either if that ordinance doesn't pass, or if you have to make dilutions to it, it will badly damage the government's image, it will shake confidence, and it will send out a negative impact to industry, just at the time when you're hoping this budget is reviving animal spirits.
Well, Karan, first of all, the Honorable Finance Minister in the Rajya Sabha has at great length dwelled on each aspect of the amendments to the land bill that we have introduced, and each one of them, and I repeat, each one of them is in the interest of the farmers, it is in the interest of national security, it is in the interest of creating a more robust rural infrastructure, particularly irrigation.
So are you ruling out dilutions?
It is in the interest of our mission.
Are you ruling out dilutions to get the ordinance passed?
It is in the interest of our mission to achieve a house, electricity, roads, sanitation, jobs for every citizen in India.
But are you ruling out dilutions to get the ordinance passed?
Having said that, the Prime Minister in the Lok Sabha very rightly put it, this government stands committed to the farmers' welfare, and if at all it requires any more discussion, we are open to a dialogue, open to a discussion with all parties.
That sounds as if you're prepared to accept dilutions. That sounds as if you're prepared to accept dilutions.
Not at all, Karan. I am saying we are open to a dialogue to explain all the various provisions, how they impact national security, how they are interests of the farmers.
My last question, Mr. Goyal. Are you saying you're open to a dialogue but you rule out dilution? Are you saying you're open to a dialogue but you rule out dilution?
Who am I to rule out dilution? I am saying this government is open to a dialogue, and we are very, very sensitive to all schools of thought. We believe a consensual approach will be in the best interest of India.
All right,
and I'm
Mr.
sure
Goyal,
all opposition
we're going to have to leave it there.
Will come on board on this bill.
I'm going to have to end this there. I'll note what you said. Who am I to rule out dilutions? Let's hope, in fact, you aren't forced into dilutions. And let's also hope there are no rollbacks on this budget. But my gratitude to you for giving us this interview. And if you have been, thanks for watching.
Thank you.
There we end this particular show tonight. Goodbye. Good night.